If you've ever been in the military, or if you grew up around anyone who was, you know this knife. 7 inches of black-coated blade, stacked leather handle worn smooth by field use, the words K-bar stamped into the ricasso above the crossguard. It is the knife that went ashore with the Marines at Guadalcanal, at Iwo Jima, at every major amphibious assault the Marine Corps ran across the Pacific. It is the knife Marines trusted more than their bayonets. Trusted enough in many cases to throw the bayonet away and carry the K-bar instead. It is still in production today, still made in Olean, New York, still stamped with the same name it has carried since 1924. But the company that first put that name on a blade is gone, and so is the second company, and the third, and the fourth. This is the story of a knife that outlived every organization that ever owned it. This is a knife guy story. The year is 1897. A group of 38 men file papers in Tidioute, Pennsylvania, to form a limited partnership called the Tidioute Cutlery Company. Tidioute is a river town in the northwestern part of the state, part of the network of small manufacturing communities that grew up along the Pennsylvania oil fields and waterways in the decades after the Civil War. The cutlery industry in this region is not glamorous. It is precision metalwork, grinding and finishing and fitting, the unglamorous manufacturing backbone of a country that needs blades for every trade it practices. Tidioute cutlery never quite figures out how to be profitable. By the turn of the century, it is dissolved. What dissolves a company does not always dissolve an asset. In January 1902, a man named Wallace R. Brown purchases what remains of Tidioute Cutlery. By March, he has incorporated a new entity in Pennsylvania, the Union Razor Company. Within a month, it is operational, Brown as chairman. Within 7 years, he has expanded the product line enough that the name Union Razor no longer fits. And on January 25, 1909, the company is renamed Union Cutlery Company. The name is broader, more honest about what the business actually is. Now, before I keep going, I just want to say that this is just one of the stories I have in mind to tell everyone about. If these are just into your liking, I would appreciate a like and subscribe, or just talk to me, tell me what's in your mind right now. Okay, back to the story. In 1911, the Olean, New York Chamber of Commerce comes calling with the standard inducement that small industrial cities use throughout this era to attract manufacturers. Tax incentives, land, a building. Brown accepts. By December, the move is underway. And by 1912, Union Cutlery is operating at 434 North 9th Street in Olean, with the Pennsylvania operation shut behind it. You would not know it from looking at the building, but what Wallace Brown has moved to this small city in the Cattaraugus County hills is the origin point of something that will eventually be trusted with men's lives in a war. For the first decade of Olean operations, Union Cutlery makes hunting knives and outdoor blades. Solid work, steady business, the kind of regional manufacturer that fills catalogs without dominating them. Then, sometime around 1923, a package arrives at the company. Inside it is a bearskin and a letter, both sent by an Alaskan hunter. The letter is barely legible, damaged, crudely written, the spelling and penmanship both unreliable. What Brown can make out from it is that the hunter had used one of his company's knives to kill a bear when his rifle jammed during an attack. 2 fragments of words are readable. K-bar. Most accounts read this as a garbled rendering of kill a bear, though the exact original phrase cannot be confirmed because no one can fully read the letter. What is confirmed is what Brown does next. In January 1924, he registers the K-bar trademark. He takes those 2 fragments and makes them a name. You need to sit with that for a moment. The identity that will eventually make this company famous and then outlast it through 4 owners and 2 bankruptcies comes from a letter no one could fully read. The most recognizable combat knife name in American military history is assembled from the illegible handwriting of a man whose name no one recorded. What Brown does with those fragments is less a story of invention than of attention. He receives something barely readable and he pays attention to it. That instinct is the founding act of everything that follows. By the late 1930s, Ka-Bar is well established as a name in hunting and outdoor knives. What it is not yet is a fighting knife. That changes in 1942, and the change does not begin with Ka-Bar at all. It begins with a problem. The Marine Corps goes into the Pacific with an equipment failure. The standard issue fighting knife, the USN Mark I utility knife, is a stiletto design, built for thrusting, with a narrow blade that is useful for one thing and nearly useless for everything else. Marines actually need a knife to do. You are on a beach in the Pacific, your equipment must open ration cans, drive nails, dig, clear vegetation, slash wire. And when it comes to that, fight. A stiletto blade with its narrow tip is brittle for prying, for leverage, for the dozen utility tasks a man in the field performs every day before combat becomes the question. The Corps needs a different answer. The design that emerges is not one man's invention. USMC Colonel John M. Davis and Major Howard E. America worked through the specifications together. A clip-point blade 7 inches long enough to reach internal organs, light enough to carry without burden. Thicker blade stock than the Mark I, a stacked leather handle for grip in wet conditions, a steel crossguard, straight, protecting the hand, a phosphate finish, matte black, non-reflective. A small fuller runs partway down the flat of the blade, not for bloodletting as the folklore sometimes suggests, but to reduce weight while preserving structural strength. The design is a utilitarian argument, not an aesthetic one. Every element has a reason. The Marine Quartermaster initially rejects it. The Commandant overrules the Quartermaster. On November 23, 1942, the Marine Corps officially adopts the 1219C2 fighting utility knife. The first production run ships on January 27, 1943, from Camillus Cutlery Company in New York, not from Ka-Bar. Camillus is the initial and ultimately largest manufacturer, producing over 1 million of the knives during the war. Union Cutlery Ka-Bar is one of several firms brought in as production scales to meet demand, alongside Robeson Cutlery and Pal Cutlery. The knife that will eventually bear Ka-Bar's name exclusively begins its life as a multi-manufacturer government contract. What makes it famous has nothing to do with the contract. What happens in the Pacific is not a story about the design. It is a story about trust. By 1944, a Ka-Bar is being issued to virtually every Marine in a combat branch who wants one. And what you find in the documented accounts is that Marines are throwing their bayonets away. The bayonet is a fixed blade weapon optimized for attachment to a rifle. It is a specialist tool, and in the dense jungle fighting of the Pacific, specialization is a liability. In the close quarters work of Guadalcanal, in the brutal fortified positions on Iwo Jima, the Ka-Bar is more useful in almost every situation. It drives tent stakes, opens sea rations, digs when entrenching tools aren't at hand, cuts vegetation. And when the fighting comes to the knife, which it does because in the Pacific it always eventually does, Marines trusted the Ka-Bar in a way they did not trust the bayonet. Private First Class Clarence Garrett of the 28th Regiment, 5th Marine Division, used his Ka-Bar to kill a sword-wielding Japanese officer who came at him when he had no other option. He took 2 wounds in the process and received the Purple Heart with a gold star. That account made it into the official record. Most did not. The men who carried the knife home after the war knew what it had done, and they told people, quietly, the way the credibility of tools gets transmitted person to person through demonstrated use rather than advertising. That is how reputations that actually hold get built. When Union Cutlery changes its corporate name in 1952, it does not choose a name that honors Wallace Brown or the Tityute founders or the decades of manufacturing in Olean. It names itself after the knife, Ka-Bar Cutlery Inc. The company has become secondary to its own product. The name on the blade has more gravity than the company name it came from. This is a strange thing to watch happen, a manufacturer subordinated to its own trademark. But it is the honest accounting of what the Marines in the Pacific had done to the name by carrying it through a war. What follows next is the part of the story that doesn't appear in company literature. Wallace Brown's son, R. Danforth Brown, runs Ka-Bar Cutlery through the 1950s. Danforth Brown dies in March 1960. The Brown family, with no successor ready to take the company forward, sells it the following year, 1961. The buyers sell it again shortly afterward to a group of entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurial group cannot make it work and files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The Ka-Bar assets are purchased by Robinson Knife Company. Robinson sells to Cole National Corporation of Ohio in 1966. Cole National is a large consumer products company that holds Ka-Bar the way a portfolio manager holds a position, as an asset on a balance sheet, not as something its people built. You can feel the drift in that sequence. Each transaction moves the name one step further from the people who built it, from Wallace Brown paying attention to an illegible letter, from the Marines who threw their bayonets away and staked their confidence on something they had tested in the worst possible conditions. Cole National goes into serious financial difficulty and files for bankruptcy in 1982. During the liquidation, the Ka-Bar product line is purchased by a company called American Consumer Products. American Consumer Products holds it until 1996, when the assets are sold to Alcus Corporation of Olean, New York. Between 1961 and 1996, Ka-Bar passes through 5 different owners. 2 of those owners go bankrupt. Not one of them is able to hold the thing together. What survives each transaction is not the company. It is the name and the design it has been attached to since 1942. The knife that the Marines proved in the Pacific is more durable than any of the organizations that hold the license to make it. That is an unusual situation for a manufactured object to find itself in, and it happens because the proof was real. Once trust of that kind is established, earned under those conditions by those men, no bankruptcy proceeding can file it away. Alcus Corporation is the parent company of Cutco Cutlery, and Alcus, it turns out, is headquartered in Olean, the same city where Wallace Brown moved Union Cutlery in 1912, the same city where Ka-Bar has been made for most of its history. The knife that began in Tidioute, Pennsylvania, that moved to Olean with Brown, that went through 5 owners and 2 bankruptcies in 35 years, comes back in 1996 to the city where it always belonged. In 2003, Ka-Bar consolidates operations to 200 Homer Street in Olean, and that is where the company operates today, still part of the Cutco Alcus family. What Alcas brings is something the previous 4 owners couldn't sustain: stability, actual manufacturing infrastructure, a parent company that understands blade production and quality at scale. The Ka-Bar USMC fighting utility knife, the 1219C2 design that Colonel Davis and Major America refined in 1942, is put back into full production with proper attention to the standards that made it what it is. 1095 Crovan steel, stacked leather handle, 7-inch clip point, matte phosphate finish, not altered for the market, not modernized because modernization would signal improvement, made the way it was made because the design was already right. And the Marines who proved it said so. Here is what the Marine Corps eventually decides to do with the Ka-Bar. They stop issuing it, not immediately. The knife goes into Korea with the Marines who carry it from habit, and from what the men who came before them said, it goes into Vietnam the same way, not on any official requisition list, but on the belts of men who packed it alongside whatever the Corps told them to take. It shows up in Desert Storm. It shows up in Iraq and Afghanistan, where in the early 2000s it is reissued as standard equipment for some US troops, and where Marines who are not officially issued one bring their own. The USMC stops stamping it onto the table of organization and equipment, and the knife keeps going to war anyway. If you want to understand what the Pacific did to the reputation of that blade, that is your answer. The institution moves on. The men in the institution do not. What you are watching in that pattern, across Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, 2 decades in the Middle East, is not nostalgia. Nostalgia is what makes people put old things on shelves. This is something different. This is a working tool that keeps getting chosen in active combat environments by people whose lives depend on the choice. The 7-inch clip point and the stacked leather handle are not going to war because anyone thinks they are beautiful. They are going to war because the design still solves the problem it was built to solve in 1942. Nothing about jungle fighting or desert fighting or urban fighting has changed what a knife needs to do. The design that Colonel Davis and Major America signed off on in November 1942 is still the correct answer to the question. Under Cutco/Alcas, Ka-Bar now produces over 100 different knife models. Hunters, tactical folders, outdoor tools. The product line today looks nothing like the lean wartime operation that made one design for one customer. What does not change is the 1219C2, the USMC fighting utility knife, Same steel, same handle, same 7 inches, same matte phosphate finish, sits in the current catalog exactly as it sat in the 1943 production run. Because Ka-Bar has learned what happens when you change it, the Marines tell you. They have been telling the company for 80 years by continuing to reach for the original when they go somewhere that actually matters, that the original is not a legacy product. It is the product. If you buy a Ka-Bar USMC fighting knife today, it is made within a few miles of where Wallace Brown set up shop in 1912. Olean has a Cutco.K-Bar visitor center. The city that offered Wallace Brown tax incentives and a building to relocate from Pennsylvania has built a monument to what he brought with him. The name came from a letter that arrived at that city. The knife came back to that city after outlasting 4 other companies. And the official procurement relationship with the Marine Corps. There is something almost stubborn about that geography. The way the thing keeps returning to where it started, regardless of who owns it or what the current requisition list says. The knife in the drawer, if you have one, or if your father does or his father, may carry a different stamp depending on when it was made. Camillus, Robeson, Pal, K.A. Bar. The manufacturer's name changed with each owner, each contract, each chapter of corporate instability. The design did not change. The 7-inch clip point, the leather handle, the cross guard, the fuller running down the flat, those are identical in a 1943 Camillus and a 2024 Ka-Bar, because the design was not the property of any company. It was proved by the Marines who carried it through the Pacific. And once something is proved like that, under those conditions, no balance sheet transaction can touch it. What the Ka-Bar story actually is, when you strip the corporate history down to its argument, is this. A knife made famous by a war can outlast any company as long as someone eventually picks up the name and makes the thing right. The men who trusted it in combat were not trusting the trademark, they were trusting the blade. When the companies came and went, and the name passed from owner to owner, the blade didn't change, which means the trust didn't have to change either. The letter was barely legible. The company changed hands 5 times and went bankrupt twice. The Marine Corps officially moved on. The knife is still being made in the same city, by men still going to war with it. The name was always readable enough.